welcome. I'm going to speak to the camera in the back and scan our room, although we are a little quieter on the in-person. So I should start by saying thank you to our panelists and guests who could join us today. And then we have one of our panelists online, but really just welcome to the partnership. Thanks, Mark. I'm Andrea Woodard, Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy here at the partnership. The partnership, in collaboration with Capital Crossroads and Young Professionals Connection, welcomes everyone here today for our conversation about immigration. For the attendees online, we ask that you place any questions you have throughout the program in the chat feature. We will moderate those at the end for as much time as we have. And then for our in-person attendees, we ask to hold your questions to the end to be moderated. So we also always start off many of our public policy issue forums, many of our events with our civility pledge. The partnership works with the Robert D. and Billy Ray Center at Drake University on the Show Some Respect campaign. And with that in mind, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone of the importance of civility in today's event. Advancing meaningful conversation requires respect. And at the partnership, we urge all Iowans to engage in active listening and to be courteous as they express their opinions about issues. Together, we can have tough conversations in a respectful way and find common ground solutions. So our public policy issue forum series, we, as an organization, the goal is always to educate a broad audience on policy topics. So more people understand the issue, can engage and advocate with our elected officials. And in 2022, we've scheduled 6 public policy issue forums that will take place every other month on the third Thursday at noon. This first of the 6 this year. Our next one on Thursday, April 21st, will cover talent, and we'll share more about what we mean by talent at a later time. Brian will also put the link in the chat, so if anyone wants to get it on their calendar now, please do. Each year, the partnership's Government Policy Council develops a state and federal policy agenda, and that's what the policy team uses to advocate on for that year. The topic of immigration continues to be an important issue, and while certainly more of a federal issue, we continue to talk about the need for untapped talent, the need to recruit and retain talent at the state level as well. We believe that enabling hardworking, talented people from across the globe who choose to live and put their skills to work in the U.S. will enhance the region's international competitiveness and net many high-paying jobs for all Americans. So to strengthen talent acquisition and retention, business development and economic growth in DSM, partnership supports immigration-related legislation that will continue to improve the economy. And we also oppose state-based punitive anti-immigration proposals, and that is something we continue to work on, particularly with the state legislative session happening right now. Next, I'm going to turn it over to I would say our resident immigration expert, Laurie. Laurie, I've had the opportunity to work with Laurie since I joined the partnership. We used to have an immigration council that we engaged regularly and still lean on those experts to hear more, to learn more when needed. But I will give a quick bio and then turn it to Laurie. Laurie Chester with Dentons Davis Brown Law Firm. She is an immigration attorney and advocate. With a degree in finance, she initially practiced corporate law. And recognizing the need for immigration services in Iowa, she developed that practice and has worked primarily in immigration law for more than 20 years. And Laurie continues to assist employers, business owners, and individuals as they navigate the complex U.S. immigration system. Her clients range from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies in sectors including healthcare, IT, insurance, agriculture, chemical, higher education, churches, and other nonprofit entities. And we know that the immigration process is a complicated one, arduous for individuals and companies alike. And so when employers identify a foreign national as the best candidate for the job, we often count on Laurie's expertise and guidance in navigating that immigration process. So I could go on, but Laurie, I really want to get to our great panel today. And so with that, I will turn the floor over to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Yes. Very happy to be with everyone here today. Thank you for zooming in or coming in and braving the cold. We do have such an amazing panel. So I will introduce the panelists as well, and then we'll get started. So immediately to my left here, I have Laurie Burt from Kemin Industries. She is the head of worldwide communications for Kemin. Kemin is a global ingredient manufacturer that serves customers in more than 120 countries with products and services for humans, pets, animals, and more. They have more than $1 billion in annual sales, and they transform billions of lives every day around the world. So in her role, Laura oversees worldwide corporate communications, including the overall promotion of the Kemin brand, and serves as the official global spokesperson. Her other responsibilities include community engagement, as the company's lead for the United Nations World Food Program Partnership, and overall management of internal and external communications. Before joining Kemin, she was manager of corporate communications at Meredith Corporation and director of media and marketing at the Greater Des Moines Partnership. And fun fact, she managed to gain a master's degree during the last couple of years, graduating with international business and foreign policy degree from Georgetown University, along with her undergraduate degree in journalism and mass communications from Iowa State University. So welcome, Lauren. You've been a little bit busy. And then Karen Edwards from Grinnell College. Karen is the Dean of International Student Affairs at Grinnell College. She and her team help Grinnell to be an internationally student-friendly institution by building cultural and regulatory fluency. Her office is responsible for the institutional compliance with the Student and Education Visitor Information System, or we lovingly refer to it as CVIS, which includes teaching and advising foreign students on benefits and limitations of their status. Her career in higher education spans more than 20 years. She's active in national and regional educational associations that focus on foreign student advising. She holds a BA from Luther College and an MA from the University of Iowa. She's an extensive traveler, and prior to coming to Grinnell, she worked at the College of Worcester in Ohio, the University of Iowa, and the Malaysian American Commission for Educational Exchange. So very nice to have you, and thank you for coming all the way from Grinnell. Really appreciate it. Okay, and then online we have Mock, and I'm gonna guess, and I'm probably gonna be wrong. Mock Sućeska? Close? Woo, yay, okay. He's from the Iowa Bureau of Refugees, and Mock serves as the bureau chief for the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services, alongside his role as the State of Iowa Refugee Coordinator through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Mock originates in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and was transplanted to Des Moines in 1993 as a refugee, fleeing war-torn Yugoslavia with his family. Mock's professional career has been devoted to advocating and supporting refugees across the state in an effort to promote a more equitable community for all. With more than 12 years experience in nonprofits and state government, it's Mock's life journey that he's provided a unique and necessary perspective in guiding his work. Mock completed his political science undergraduate degrees at the University of Iowa with a double major in religion and history. And he also achieved his MPA degree through Drake University with an emphasis on public policy. And in his words, education, accessibility, and opportunity are keys to success. Mock, thank you for joining us online. Okay, so I'm going to let each panelist give just a few brief remarks to start us off, and then we'll get going with some questions. So Lauren, would you please lead us off?
Yes, thank you, Laurie. It's a pleasure to be here today representing Kemin Industries, and the topic of immigration is so close to our work and our workforce, and that Kemin is a multinational company headquartered here in Des Moines, Iowa. And it's essential as a business founded in science that we bring in people with specialties that come from all around the world. So it's very critical that we are able to bring those people to the US and that they can continue our vision of transforming the quality of life. And Kemin is a big proponent of more inclusive and more extensive immigration policy that would allow for workers that are foreign born to be in our country and contributing to all of our work and things that we're trying to do here.
Karen.
Okay, welcome again. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I don't often get to speak to employers and to that side, but my passion has been and my career has been dedicated to supporting international students directly. And so as a representative of higher education, Grinnell is a highly selective, internationally known and renowned location for and destination for international enrollment. About 20% of our students come from outside the US. And so I think when we talk about this topic today, that higher education and business really are partners in that journey, maybe from a little different angle, but I'm a native Iowan. I left on purpose and I returned on purpose, and I love this state. And I'm also really impressed by the talent that is right here and that we have as higher education institutions in the state recruited to be here and study here and live here. And so I think it's a really an untapped population that we maybe don't take enough advantage of. Grinnell has 350 international students enrolled, but we also have about 70 students in the US, most of whom have left the state of Iowa, but are working somewhere in the US using their practical training authorization. But in this state, there's 9,500 international students, degree-seeking students at institutions across the state. So I hope we can talk a little bit about that untapped market.
Absolutely, thank you. And Mark, how about you?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hello to you all. Again, my name is Sućeska, and I am a part of the Refugee Services Network and supports that we have here across the state and ensuring that our new arrivals and all immigrant communities have access to opportunities as they make Iowa their new home. It's been a busy time these last few months with the Afghan resettlement, still sort of reeling from the pandemic, and really looking at what opportunities employers have presented to leverage the existing workforce that are refugees and immigrants, and how we bring those two worlds together. We know traditionally refugees and immigrants have been a foundation of many companies and industries' workforce. And so how do we continue that legacy, build upon that legacy, and provide the supports needed not only to the refugees and immigrants themselves, but also employers in the greater community, so we all have a sustainable future and infrastructure moving forward. So excited to be here. Hello to all the panelists and guests here today, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points, everyone, to start us off. So Karen, you're going to get your wish. I'm going to come to you first and say, what is the current picture of international talent in Iowa colleges and universities? And to follow up on that, how can businesses be more proactive in hiring that talent?
Well, as I mentioned, 9,500 international students in higher education in our state. They are contributing per the NAF's economic value tool, $239 million to our state's economy, supporting 1,935 jobs. That, it's publicly available data and super fascinating. But when we talk about the best way to be proactive about hiring international talent, when we speak specifically about this cohort, I think the goal is to incorporate inclusive approaches to our recruitment processes. And I see that firsthand and up close as I work with students who are looking for internships, looking for jobs. Maybe it's good to start with how impressive the cohort is and maybe to step away a little bit and think about that long before they reached our state. They made it through the college admissions funnel, which is no easy feat. At Grinnell, for example, over 5,000 applications from international candidates for 90 seats in next fall's class. That differs from university to university, of course, but they left everything familiar. They flew 20 to 30 hours from home to pursue academic priorities in a new place, typically in a new language. So if you think about the cultural savvy and the navigation and survival skills, it's a pretty talented bunch of students. I would hire them for sure. And that's before they even make it to graduation, right? So I think rather than screening out international candidates automatically to open the door and expand to that expanded talent pool requires learning about practical training authorization, learning about how that path towards employment here works. And most of this cohort hold an F1 visa. So I think on the part of the employer to understand that and to spend a little energy and bandwidth thinking about what that means goes a long way. We see, for example, when employers post, well, we're more familiar in higher ed, a lot of our students are using Handshake, for example, to access jobs. And employers are asked questions as they post a position about work authorization requirements. And one of the options is to post that you are open to temporary work authorization through CPT or OPT. That immediately means that students on the other side of that Handshake application pool will see you as a viable employer and a place where they're going to put their submit their application. There's really three types of practical training authorization that allow access. They look slightly different from institution to institution, especially curricular practical training, because it's also dependent on the college's curriculum. But in all three, both are all curricular, optional, and STEM practical training, the designated school official at the college or university that the student attended plays a significant role in the advising practices of helping students access and navigate those types of work permits. We are, as an institution, responsible for supporting, for example, our STEM majors who have access to 3 additional years of work permission after they graduate. And those individuals are actually still connected to the DSO at their home institution for all 3 of those years. So the part of the employer to support students either on optional practical training or STEM practical training after they graduate, it is fairly minimal because of the partnership that you have with the DSO at the school, home school. And then of course, I'll lean on Laurie when we get to talking about H-1B and next paths, but to recognize that a full year and potentially up to 3 years of employment eligibility are automatically on the table for those students.
Thank you. That's a great overview. Mark, let me turn to you and ask, how can businesses go about hiring refugee talent?
Sure, that's a great question. I appreciate you posing that. Before I answer that question, I think it's important to lay a historical sort of context that employers have been hiring refugees for many years. And so it's how do we expand on existing employers or bringing in new employers to really leverage the talent pool and also lean in on existing industries that have traditionally hired refugees. Whenever we go into conversations and establishing initial relations, there are always sort of a slew of questions that employers have when it comes to hiring refugees. What kind of documentation do they have? What kind of services will be provided as far as social wraparound, social services, and then what kind of partnerships are we to have between the agencies, community, and those employers? When we look at the established employers historically that we've worked with, we've always had a network that has supported employers in their efforts in wanting to hire refugees. When you look at companies such as Tyson, JBS, some of the more traditional employers with meatpacking and industry, we've really developed and fostered relations with those employers over the years. Refugees not only come with a solid work ethic, they are a loyal workforce. We see generations of people within these companies working and bringing on a family and doing natural sort of recruitment for the next wave of workforce. When it comes to the documentation piece, all refugees that arrive to the United States are legally eligible to work. They either come with an employment authorization or in some cases, depending on refugee status with respect to SIV, special immigrant visa holders, or even with this group that we've seen now with humanitarian parolees coming out of Afghanistan, Some may even be arriving already with their social securities. So right there, that gives an indication to an employer, okay, the documentation piece is good. I don't have to worry about that. But then it comes to the long-term sustainable component of it. Language barriers, cultural barriers, what kind of technical assistance is there for the employers, but also the potential employee themselves. We have sort of a system in place that's been implemented for many years between the employers that we work with and the refugees that we try to employ as cultural bridgers, brokers, liaisons, whatever term you'd like to use. So these resettlement agencies that are working with refugees, the Bureau of Refugee Services that are working with refugees, we are developing and fostering those relations, not only with our employer, but with those employers with respect to looking at a lead worker model. For example, at Tyson plants, we have refugees that we've identified that maybe have a certain skill set. The level of English is higher than other groups. Why don't we look to promote them in those lead worker positions where then a entire workforce or work pool of candidates will be able to work there by mitigating that language or cultural barrier. If you go on the floor to Tyson's, JBS's, the entire floor is 6 or 7 different languages being spoken. English isn't a barrier. So we look at how to leverage that and working with our new employers that are excited in some of our more non-traditional avenues. How do we bring people on? Well, this is what needs to happen up front. This is what pool of candidates we have available. How do we pilot certain programs or pilot certain cultural groups before we bring in a larger amount of folks that may be eligible to work there? And then it's really that continuous sustainable relationship, not only with the case management and social services that the agencies provide, but what are we doing in working with our HR departments and helping bridge those cultural differences? If there are issues that do arise as a result of cultural differences, we have our liaisons or refugee and immigrant guides that work with HR departments and employers. Transportation also sometimes becomes an issue. We've been able to establish partnerships with a multitude of companies where the companies themselves are providing transportation as long as we're able to secure a good amount of people to work at these companies. We're really leveraging the unemployment rate and this excitement of employers coming to our doors and wanting to utilize this talent pool. And we're doing everything in our power to make that happen. But there will be challenges naturally when working with non-native English speaking communities. That's why we are here to reassure that we're providing technical assistance, that long-term support to really bring the two worlds together, because we see generations of families, refugees working in these companies and really understanding the value of opportunity that's been given to them. And we just like to, hopefully we can build up on that and continue those partnerships.
Thank you. That's excellent information for employers. And so, Lauren, from an employer's perspective, what are you currently experiencing in your efforts to attract and retain talent? And do you have a dedicated strategy for bringing in foreign talent?
Yes, we absolutely do have a strategy for both national and international recruitment, retention, programs, strategies, communication tools, working very closely with our local and global HR teams. That's really crucial. An interesting aspect of Kemin is that being a science-based company, we may seek a candidate and there's only 1 or 2 people in the world that have that skill set. And we want to be able to bring them here. We don't have a huge pool of candidates for certain roles. And if we're not able to bring them to the US and work on projects, then it can hinder a big opportunity, a big project. And I think from an international perspective, there's often the dialogue of people, if they are questioning immigration reform or policies about jobs being taken away from those in the US. An example at Kemin would be if we were able to hire one of those scientists, 1 or 2 of the experts in a certain arena, bring them here to our headquarters in Des Moines, that scientist would need researchers, lab techs, other scientists. So we would actually be growing our workforce here. So it's much more of a net positive. And so we have those recruitment campaigns that we're doing external, but it's also a lot of working with policymakers and community members as well, and making sure that those relationships are continuous. Like past two speakers just said about having those relationships with universities and colleges. Can we tap into the people that are already here in the US? And then like the refugee crisis, Kemin worked really closely with those here in Polk County to say, we would love to hire the people when you have them, call us. What can we do to make that an easier transition? So it's grassroots all the way to really strategic programs, communications, and also policy, and trying to make sure that we share that positive message about how crucial that workforce is for the US is very, very important.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great segue into what I was thinking about next was what can business leaders do to encourage immigration reform? Because it sounds like the current, availability is not quite what we would like. And so, I'll put this out to anyone, but Lauren, do you want to speak to that just a little bit first? And then...
Sure. I think it's perfect that we're at the partnership today, but the public-private partnerships are huge. For, again, universities, a corporation, working with local groups, community groups, state government, federal government. We all have to work together in that. And as policies continue, hopefully to be more inclusive for foreign-born talent, sharing the success stories of that and saying how people came here, what they did, and share that message more broadly with all those stakeholders, I think is really, really important.
Oh, that's a great point. Mark or Karen, who wants to draw out? Karen, are you ready to?
Sure. I can. I just add to what you've been saying, and it's actually really, I haven't really thought about it in that way, so that's super fun. I'm more familiar with how higher education is advocating for areas of immigration reform, which really I think are for us to prioritize paths towards legal immigration, but also it has to be coupled with a national strategy to think proactively about how we as a country recruit foreign talent to our universities and how we support and treat their experience here as a path forward. So NAFSA, Association of International Educators, for example, has tremendous advocacy efforts available online with talking points of areas that are priority for higher education to improve visa processing, to consider paths forward by expanding dual intent. So our international students come in under that F1 visa or that J visa that requires non-immigrant intent, and that becomes a huge barrier moving forward. So that is probably, at least from where I sit, one of the most important parts of advocacy that needs to happen, so that we think about all those folks who are here as a prime candidate and remove some of the barriers to having them work at Kemin.
There you go. Yeah, no, that's great. Maka, I think the situation with refugees is just a little different, but how do you think businesses can help, business leaders can help in that regard on immigration policy?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And as a public servant, I have to tread lightly. But, in looking at the question of reform from our perspective, what kind of reform is there within the private sector and higher education? Not necessarily immigration reform, but looking at the existing immigrant pool with respect to refugees, how are we doing to bridge the gap between the barriers to employment or higher education for the folks that are already here? So one of the ways that, we look at that is really advocating through certain coalitions that are existent here within Central Iowa, such as the Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa. There's the Refugee Alliance of Lynn County in Eastern Iowa. These are all coalitions and groups that get together that bring a multitude of stakeholders to be a part of these groups to really ask questions. What are the gaps? What are the gaps that are in place between getting a refugee hired at Kemin? What are the gaps that are existing between the refugee going into higher education? We have refugees that arrive with a multitude of skills and a very rich background from their home countries. what are we doing to help provide and support an infrastructure that's going to get them to where they once were, a physician, engineer, teacher, whatever profession that may be. So we're really trying to look at, what opportunities can we create, and are there barriers that we are arbitrarily putting in front of refugees that necessarily don't need to be there? Of course, we don't want to compromise the integrity of certain rules and policies, of course, but what are those flexibilities? Where can we alleviate some of these challenges that historically were in place just because they were there and nobody asked the question, well, why are they there? And these groups and the agencies that are represented in helping support refugees are asking those questions. And I think a lot of employers and the private sector has answered that call and really has been at the table to be a part of these discussions. And I'm happy to say that those discussions are robust, but now it comes down to action. What's going to happen in the next steps. With this particular group of Afghans, we have folks that worked with our United States military as interpreters, translators, worked with NGOs and had contracts, and so are coming with a certain skill and I think a certain level of offering that they bring to the table. And so looking at what industries are available, pairing those with the skill sets that people have, meeting people halfway, and asking some of those non-traditional questions that really just come down to, why are we doing this way? Why are we doing it this way? Because it's always been done. Do we have the flexibility to change it?
That's very helpful, and I'll circle back later. So be thinking of some specifics you might be able to share, because I think we could get into some specifics. So did you have a question? Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to get to the issue of the integrity of the existing system, because that is a latent issue. Many people are critical of the existing system for the lack of integrity. And that in, for example, asylum law on refugees is generally, and I'll speak as an attorney who's experienced this, a significant amount of fraud and misrepresentation to get into the country. And that's, to me, that's a fact. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. And there's an enormous incentive to claim this asylum status up front. It doesn't even require a good faith attestation. It just, and if you go over to Omaha, and I've been there before many times, most of the cases are decided for deportation. In other words, the vast majority of asylum claims are denied for many reasons of, they're not legitimate claims. And so that aspect of immigration law isn't, I don't think it's generally accepted as totally having integrity. And in business immigration, I've seen businesses sort of, do a very superficial talent search in the area here to bring in one of their guys from a foreign country. And this is a form of diversion too. And then in education, I mean, it's an enormous scheme how students devise methods to stay over or to reconvert their status. Everyone knows this, and I can't say it doesn't exist. And so we're looking at a system which, arguably doesn't have integrity. And that's inconsistent with civil society and the good faith claims of citizenship of civil society. And I can't help but think civil society requires a better system.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think it's something people are concerned about. Now, I've been doing immigration law for actually closer to 30 years now. And so and I'll let panelists certainly respond, but I would just to say that I don't necessarily agree with your characterization of all those things. Now, I'm not saying, you take any system anyone can think of, and some human's going to figure out a way to divert it. So, I certainly can't say, I agree with you. I can't say it doesn't exist. I would certainly say from my vantage point, just giving you guys a little time to think here, my vantage point that, I can't personally speak to the asylum system because I'm not involved in that, but Mark possibly can do that a little bit more. I can very, very, with a lot of experience, speak to the business immigration system and say that the rules are very strict and highly enforced, and very difficult to subvert. Now, if someone lies, of course, someone lies, and we could certainly have some more investigations of certain things. But I would say with my clients, there is, when it's required, which is not always required, like for temporary visas, you don't need to show you can't find a US worker because it's a temporary visa. But for a green card, yeah, you have to show you can't find a US worker. And, I take my clients through a very rigorous process to show that. So we may have to agree to disagree on that point. But I don't know, Mark, if you would like to speak, having been through the system a little bit, not the asylum system, because you came as a refugee is my understanding, but asylum is a little different. Do you have any comment you'd like to make on that integrity of the system?
Well, the refugee process is a very complex and rigorous process for one to achieve refugee status. In order to be recognized as a refugee through the UN High Commission for Refugees, there have to be a multitude of steps completed before one actually has that final designation, which is to set them for travel to their final place of resettlement. From security backgrounds and vetting to medical screenings to community orientations and orientations before one is set to travel to their final destination, all of these factors and sort of components have to be completed. And it's not a quick process. It's a very lengthy, cumbersome process, and one that is taken very seriously. And with respect to integrity, one that is done as well as it can be by the professionals who are administering these services. When we are talking about, if we are to talk about the situation with the Afghan evacuees that were airlifted out of Afghanistan and brought over to the United States, that process that is traditionally done in a refugee camp overseas or in a second country of asylum, those processes were condensed to a handful of military bases across the country. So anyone who is set for final destination, Afghan or not, goes through a rigorous security vetting process. I cannot confirm nor deny that things slip through the cracks, but I can tell you what we know is in place to ensure that everyone is vetted. All of the processes maintain their integrity. And once people do arrive, we try to support them as well as we can. At the end of the day, when we're talking about refugees, Afghan or not, we're talking about people and we're talking about survivors. Whether or not certain circumstances do arise once they do arrive, we navigate that accordingly as well as we can. But refugees are coming under circumstances that none of us can maybe fathom, or if we can, provides a little bit of level of empathy and understanding that people are fleeing and want to go to a safe place. So we do what we can on here domestically with respect to resettlement agencies, the Bureau of Refugee Services, and we trust that the systems are in place with the refugee process, maintain their integrity and due diligence. So that's what I can speak to, and that's what I can share with respect to the refugee process.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Karen.
I think it's hard to respond because I feel like we're starting in a very different premise at the beginning, right? So I feel like absolutely there's potential for fraud in any system that we're working with. I feel like my premise when I think about immigration reform and when I look at how the system welcomes or prevents international students, specifically in my work, from accessing the system and moving forward in the system, that my premise and my goal is to increase access, increase legitimacy, increase legitimate paths to legitimacy, and so we're starting. I'm not considering the folks who are trying to access it in my work are not. I'm starting from the premise of good assumption, and then I'm putting a system in place that welcomes the good assumption and helps it move forward, instead of starting from the premise of criminal intent and then moving backwards from that. So it's really coming at the question at a really basic level, right?
Well, I have to say, I've seen too many documents come across my desk in the practice of immigration law, which are fraud. That's just the way it is. It's an entire industry. I've seen students falsify academic credentials. I've seen employers falsify a job search.
And although you've seen US students do that too.
Right.
Or maybe you not in your work, but I mean.
But US students aren't asking for the benefit to come into the country.
Yeah, and I certainly can't say that we don't have any document fraud or anything like that. I would say it's rare in the sense that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is the enforcement agency, now controls the student visa process and very rigorously controls it, in fact. So not to, we're not going to be able to solve this with the debate right now, but I really appreciate
Well, I don't see a diverse point of view on the forum.
No,
I think this is a non-inclusive forum because it doesn't include other points of view.
Yeah, no, and you're bringing that, and I really appreciate that. And sometimes it's very difficult to find that. So that's why I appreciate you doing that, because, it is good to bring that up. I would say I've seen a few people, falsify documents and they've been caught. So, that's my experience. Your experience is different. And so I appreciate hearing about your experience. Absolutely.
Here in Des Moines, I've had to throw things out.
Yeah. No,
and it's very common.
Yeah, and I totally hear you. So no, I appreciate you bringing that forward. And I guess I think we do need to move on to another topic, but I want to give you just an opportunity to say from your vantage point as an employer who's been involved in immigration for a long time, what is your experience or response to the integrity of the system?
Sure. Well, and no system is perfect. There's bad actors everywhere, right? In everything. But at Kemin, integrity is what we were founded on, and it's a family-owned and operated business. And there's been amazing candidates that we haven't been able to bring over. And we hire attorneys that help us, and we want to be above board on everything. And that's just who we are and what we do. And it wouldn't help us in a positive way to bring someone and have it be falsified, whether it's their credentials, how they got here. So that is never anything that even rises to the surface. And that's just speaking from Kemin's perspective. There may be other entities or companies that do something different, but it's a rigorous process. It's not easy. It's very complicated. And there's a lot of people trying to do it well and do it right. And even when we do all those things, sometimes it doesn't work to get some of the people here, and we followed all the rules and processes and it doesn't work. So that's why, the system couldn't be refined or made better in some way. Most systems can be. And we've seen a big change from the last administration in DC to the administration now. So reform is always possible depending on how you look at it, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I'd love to circle back more on that. I just want to kind of get to some other topics, but very happy to talk about more because I think, it's definitely something that we need to address. So just had another couple of questions here, but I'd very much like to, are we getting some questions on the chat or no?
Not yet, but
okay.
We encourage people online to submit your questions in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure where we are on time, because I want to make sure we handle everyone's question, because we definitely do want to be inclusive on the discussion. So So and maybe this is kind of really continuing it, what kind of policy changes do you see that we should be doing on the state or federal level? And that certainly, well, we just talked a little bit about integrity of the system, but there's other roadblocks, other changes that, would be helpful. So can we identify a few of those? And I guess I'll start with you, Karen. You mentioned the dual intent. Is there anything else, and we can explain that more, but is there anything else that you would really love to see changed at the policy or federal or state level that could actually happen?
Well, yeah, I would rank dual intent as a really significant one. I'm actually, my mind is sort of going down the rabbit hole of integrity of the system. And I'm thinking about all the changes in the last 20 years to the international student system, the evolution of CVIS, the tracking, there's just been so many more pieces put in place. And so maybe from the perspective of change, what I've loved to see about that system is an increase of consistency. But a challenge, I'd say, in the name of consistency and to maintain integrity is that institutions of higher education are not always well-staffed to meet those standards. And so I do think, I know in my field that I see that, that historically international education has been focused on cultural onboarding, linguistic onboarding, helping students adjust to navigate to a new place. And increasingly our work is mired in immigration and regulatory work, but not necessarily recognized as part of the institutional infrastructure as a compliance component. So that might be maybe a more grassroots level in terms of the institutional partnership on the integrity side of things.
So making, yeah. So
I feel really privileged to work at a school where that's a very high priority, right?
Yes.
But I know colleagues at other institutions across the country who have not been able to maintain that level of integrity because of the staffing demands.
Yeah, so that's a good thing. And I know just from my experience with colleges and universities around Iowa, I see a really good commitment to that, but not that I know every single one. So that's really good. Lauren, do you have some suggestions?
I would say from an employer standpoint and a multinational, that making sure that our state laws work well with the federal laws and that it's not combative in trying to hire foreign talent or with students. How are they working again in partnership? So one does not counteract the other. And with filling out paperwork and all of those protocols to go through. And I think too, I think I mentioned it earlier, but there needs to be a change in the public conversation, that there can be more net positives than net negatives. And when it comes to the workforce, and COVID-19 has changed so many things, including recruitment, retention, but there's a silver lining there that jobs are changing and we need people to work, and there's new innovations happening all the time. And so we should be able to tap into the really talented foreign-born talent and make that, again, more positive than a negative in the public conversation.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, you mentioned these partnerships that are happening. Have you identified particular areas of policy change that would be helpful in integrating refugees in Iowa's economy?
Well, I think what, the baseline that needs to be established for networks that the Bureau of Refugee Services is a part of, alongside our resettlement partners and nonprofits, is that we're not in the business of changing policy or advocating for policy. We are guided by policy. So those kinds of questions happen on our behalf for those who have a much higher pay grade and who are much more skilled in this area. We are grassroots organizations and agencies that are trying to ensure the well-being of newly arrived refugees and immigrants to our community. That's just the bottom line. And how we set our work and what we do is from a place of compassion and empathy. We know that policy guides us. In particular, our office is guided by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And of course, there are policies that are always changing with respect to service provision, funding, and any sort of changes on the global scale when it comes to refugee resettlement and human migration. With respect to the Afghan crisis, new policies had to be created at the federal level that were passed down to the localities on what service provision would look like, what sorts of funding and resources would be available, and how that's going to guide the work that we do. There are organizations, coalitions that advocate on policy change that exist in our very communities, but ones that if you are interested in learning more about and the work that they are doing, again, I encourage you to be a part of the Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa. There are subgroups and committees that address these very topics. From our perspective as a state agency, part of the Department of Human Services, we are engaging with the community to provide human services for sustainable and successful resettlement. Of course, there are going to be challenges and there will be areas that we may not be privy to, but we are doing what we can with the resources that we have. During this time and how refugee resettlement looks differently from before and now, we're playing a lot of catch up and we're trying to do as much as we can with the changing political landscapes and what policies do come down to guide us. We're all guided by politics, whether or not we choose to be a part of it or we cannot. That's just the nature of the work. But we try to do the work within the means and parameters that are guided by us and for us. Is it perfect? No, I won't be the first one to tell you, but there are mechanisms in place that are addressing the very concerns that were brought up by one of the questions, and also the issues and concerns and mechanisms that our panelists shared as well. It's the system that we have, and it's not always going to be the best, but we're trying to work and navigate within it to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the work that the office does, because it's something almost unique in the country, I think, of having, the state-sponsored agency. So yes, we have a question.
Yes, we have a question from the chat asking our panel to just cover the H-2B visa process a little bit more in detail.
Sure. I think I'm probably gonna have to take that one.
I think
I
you
don't
should
think
take
that one. Probably gonna have that, but yeah, so, there's a whole alphabet of different visas that are potentially available, although most of them are very specialized and don't relate to most employment situations. But the H-2B itself is a seasonal worker visa that allows companies to show that they can't find U.S. workers through a Department of Labor search, to show that they can't find U.S. workers for a seasonal or intermittent or one-time need, and that then they need to supplement their workforce with people from another country. And there's certain countries that are designated to allow H-2B workers to come from those countries every year. So there's an advertising process that goes through and is managed by the Department of Labor. The job has to be described in detail about first of all, what is the need? Is it really a one-time need or a seasonal need or an intermittent need? What will the employees do specifically? What kind of training, if any, or experience or education is needed to do that job, which typically we're looking at labor, kind of labor jobs. So, good examples would be something like landscaping or, certain kinds of construction that is seasonal, or, or maybe not here, but maybe a ski resort or something like that, where there's this need for a lot of workers for a little bit of the year, but not for the entire year. And so the problem that a lot of employers face is they just can't find enough people to do those jobs during that time. So they advertise, then they have to file something with Department of Labor. They have to approve, then it's got to go to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which is another federal agency. Then there's a lottery, because there's only 66,000 H-2Bs available. They're divided into 2 seasons, 33,000 each, so that the people in the South of the country don't get all the H-2Bs, and so that's divided up during the calendar year to 2 different lotteries. And so you put this in and you have a lottery. And if you're chosen, you're given a ranking actually. And if your ranking comes up, if they get to your ranking, you then file an application with the Citizenship and Immigration Service. And then assuming that everything's in place there, they approve that. Then the person has to go get a visa at their country of residence to enter the US for the period that has been requested. And then when they're finished with that, unless, it's possible someone could work a winter season here and maybe a summer season there, that's possible the same worker could do, because it's basically labor jobs. That's possible that someone could do that and have 2 approvals and switch. But if not, they have to leave the United States. So that's the H-2B process. A very good example of how our system is not really, which I say, designed to meet the current employment needs, because 66,000 is a tiny number compared to the number of seasonal jobs that go wanting. But I hope that helped the question. Was there another question? Okay. So we only have a couple minutes, but I guess I would just say that, well, there's 2 things. One, I'd like to real quick touch on, which is there anything that you would advise businesses to consider if they are going to hire foreign-born talent? So is there just a little nugget that would help? So Karen, I'll start with you.
Well, I feel like I spoke to the importance of knowing and being open to supporting F1 students on practical training. I think another nugget, I guess, that comes to mind is the role of E-Verify in allowing employers, as if they're using the E-Verify system, that also opens up the STEM OPT candidates.
Those are good. And just for the audience, E-Verify is each employer has to do an I-9 to make sure the person is authorized to work, and E-Verify is an add-on that's electronic that checks the Social Security and the immigration records to make sure that that person is authorized to work. So only the employers that access E-Verify can get the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, extension of the student work permission. So the STEM OPT. Laura, do you have something?
I'm going to add one more,
Oh, yeah,
and that is that that the access to employment through practical training is also dependent on what the student majored in at their institution. And so I think the concept of thinking about the work that's being done and the applicable paths in terms of a major. As a liberal arts college, we think very broadly about majors. And so we work closely with students to help them think about how to articulate the role. For example, how do you connect a job to an anthropology or a liberal arts kinds of interdisciplinary kinds of study? I'm confident that our students come out of their programs really prepared to do that and to think creatively about how the lens through which they're approaching their major is related.
Mm-hmm. Sure, thank you. Laura, do you have some nuggets?
I don't know if I have some nuggets. I think just the perspective of the past few years with COVID-19 has really turned everything upside down. Obviously, a lot of negatives and challenges. However, silver linings of it's totally changed the way people work and our businesses, whether it's big or small, and to use that positive opportunity to look at our workforce here in the US and then the foreign-born talent that can only help businesses and organizations and communities thrive, and to take this moment of change and let it change our perspective on the future of workforce in the US.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Mark, how about you? Do you have some nugget that you would suggest for employers considering hiring refugees?
Yeah, I would definitely say to reach out to our office. You can reach out to me and we can start a conversation. We not only help connect refugees to opportunities with employment, we work very closely with our resettlement partners, nonprofits, and ethnic community-based organizations to get folks connected to employment opportunities. But like I mentioned before, we also provide technical assistance and education. If there's an employer who is interested in wanting to hire a refugee or an entire group of refugees, alleviating some of the fears or insecurities that may arise. We are happy to answer those and provide support as well. I would also encourage our employers to be involved in some of the coalitions that I mentioned. And lastly, the Bureau of Refugee Services is continuing to foster and develop a much stronger relationship with Iowa Workforce Development and looking at some of the non-traditional employers and sectors of employment and how we leverage the availabilities and opportunities with that talent pool. So any questions or reassurance folks may want or need, you can always reach out to our office. We have a collective 260 years of experience working within refugee services and working with employers, intergovernmental relations, nonprofits, even the legal field. We're here to provide reassurance and as much education as possible to alleviate any fears or questions people may have. It's one of our responsibilities and duties as a network, and I welcome anyone who is interested to reach out to us.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we're out of time now. I really thank our panelists. I thank people who ask questions. I really appreciate that conversation and I'm interested in continuing it. And thank you to the partnership for sponsoring this and all that you do to help Iowa employers find talent and fill their needs.